The broadcast came through every channel in the known galaxy. It wasn't begging, not exactly. It was a call, formal and precise, issued by the Galactic Council itself. The words carried desperation even as they tried to sound official. We request military support against the Krah Dominion. All species are required to contribute soldiers. The Council calls for unity. The rest of the galaxy took it as expected. Debates, negotiations, hesitations about numbers, costs, and the morality of sending young lives into a war none of them had started. But when the message reached Earth, the reaction was different. The Council wanted an army. Humanity sent something else. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense, not anymore. They were the broken ones, the discarded ones, men who had nothing left to lose. Ex-special forces pulled out of black sites, war criminals who had vanished into prison systems, mercenaries who only lived for the next contract. They weren't trained for parades or public relations. They were trained to end lives, fast, brutally, and without hesitation. The galaxy would learn that distinction the hard way. Sergeant Dane sat in the transport's steel hold as it tore across void space toward the Council staging world. He didn't care about speeches or flags or the Council's sense of honor. To him, this wasn't a mission. It was a deployment, and deployments only ended one of two ways, with a body bag or with silence. Around him, the others sat in shadow. No insignias, no uniforms, just men who had been handpicked because they didn't fit anywhere else. The brass called them Special Compliance Units. Everyone else used a simpler name. Death Squads. The ship shuddered slightly as they dropped from void speed. Dane leaned his head back against the cold metal wall and closed his eyes. He could already imagine the reception. Soft-skinned alien officers trying to make sense of the monsters Earth had delivered. Sure enough, when the hatch dropped, the air was filled with that nervous silence, the kind that spreads when civilians meet predators. Rows of alien dignitaries and council marshals stood waiting, their robes stiff, their posture rigid. Their eyes darted between the humans as if they weren't sure if they had summoned soldiers or prisoners. The lead marshal, a tall insectoid with a polished carapace, stepped forward. "We thank you for your contribution," it said, voice echoing strangely. "You will be integrated into our command structure and—" "No," Dane said flatly. His voice cut through the air like a blade. The marshal froze. "Excuse me?" Dane stepped forward, boots grinding against the platform, his eyes cold. "We don't integrate. You tell us where the enemy is, we handle it. That's it." A ripple of unease spread through the aliens. One of them whispered, too loud, "Are they even disciplined? These aren't soldiers. They're killers." Dane didn't bother to answer. The whisper was true. The first assignment came quick. A Krah Dominion outpost had been raiding supply lines, crippling the Council's logistics. Other species had tried to neutralize it. They failed. The Krah had slaughtered them, left their ships burning in orbit as warnings. The humans arrived on the ground before dawn. No speeches, no warnings. Dane led his squad through the mud and ash, their faces hidden behind dark visors. They moved like phantoms, silent and merciless. When the Krah sentries spotted movement, they didn't even have time to scream. Knives found throats before alarms could be raised. Silenced rifles spat death into the night. By the time the first explosion lit the outpost sky, half the garrison was already dead. Dane stood in the middle of it, blade dripping, as fire spread across alien structures. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel anything at all. By dawn, the outpost was gone. Not conquered, not secured. Gone. When the Council investigators arrived, they found only ashes and bodies. Not a single Krah prisoner. Not a single survivor. Just silence and smoke One of the marshals whispered the words that would soon spread across the galaxy. The humans don't fight wars. They erase them. The fires of the outpost still burned when the human transport lifted off, carrying Dane and his men back toward the Council's fleet. None of them looked out the window at the devastation below. None of them spoke. Their silence was not discipline. It was instinct. Men like this had long ago learned that words only softened the edge of what they had to do. Dane sat with his hands resting loosely on his knees, the dark smear of craw blood still across his gloves. He didn't bother cleaning it off. Around him, his squad mirrored the same dead calm. Mason sharpened a blade in steady strokes, the rasp of metal against stone breaking the drone of the engines. Hale sat hunched, head low, fingers twitching like he was still pulling a trigger. Two others leaned against the bulkhead, with eyes half shut, conserving energy the way predators do after a hunt. To any outsider, they looked half feral. To Dane, they looked ready. When the transport touched down on the Council's staging platform, the reception was not celebratory. Rows of alien soldiers lined the landing bay, but their faces, whatever shapes those faces took, were pale, tense, wary. They didn't look at the humans as allies. They looked at them as if they were dangerous animals being escorted back into a cage. The insectoid marshal from before waited with a cluster of council delegates. Its mandibles clicked nervously as the humans descended the ramp. Behind it, two smaller, avian-looking dignitaries whispered furiously, their feathers puffing up in agitation. "You annihilated the entire garrison," the marshal said, its voice forced into diplomacy. "We requested that you neutralize the outpost, yes, but there were protocols. Prisoners, interrogations, intelligence gathering. What you delivered was—" It faltered, searching for the word. "Slaughter." Dane met its multifaceted eyes without blinking. "You asked for results. You got them." The marshal stiffened. One of the avians hissed. "Your methods are barbaric. This is not how the Council wages war. There are rules, codes, standards." Mason stepped forward, his knife still in hand, voice low and dangerous. "And how's that working out for you? You begged for help because you were losing. Now you're complaining because we don't fight like you?" A ripple of unease swept through the delegation. The marshal raised one clawed hand, trying to regain control. This is not sustainable. Other species will not tolerate this level of brutality. The Craw will retaliate tenfold. Already there are whispers. "Let them whisper," Dane cut in, his voice flat. "Fear is useful." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the marshal clicked its mandibles again, sharp with frustration. "Very well, but you are not free agents here. The Council has decided you will be reassigned under direct supervision. You will coordinate with Allied forces in the next operation." Dane almost smiled. It was a cold thing, barely there. "We don't coordinate." The marshal's eyes narrowed, the alien equivalent of a glare. "Then you will learn." They learned nothing. The next mission came within days. A Council convoy carrying relief supplies had been ambushed near the Veyron cluster, its escorts shredded by Craw raiders. Survivors were stranded on a barren moon, pinned down and running out of air. The Council wanted the humans to extract them, but this time the Council insisted on pairing them with another unit, a company of Karathi soldiers, one of the galaxy's proud warrior races. The Karathi were larger than men, towering brutes with scaled hides and ceremonial blades strapped to their armor. They were disciplined, organized, and, unlike the humans, obsessed with honor. The moment the two units met on the staging deck, the tension was thick enough to choke on. The Karathi commander, a scarred giant named Voron, looked Dane up and down with disdain. "So these are the Terrans," he said, his voice booming through a translator. "Killers dressed as soldiers, We heard the stories. You burned an outpost to ash instead of capturing it. Do you even understand the concept of restraint?" Dane said nothing. Varun sneered. "I will not have my men contaminated by your savagery. You will follow my command, or you will stay out of our way." Mason spat on the deck, right between Varun's clawed feet. Hale chuckled darkly. Dane simply stared at the massive alien until Varun finally turned away, muttering curses. It didn't matter. The mission would speak for itself. They dropped onto the barren moon in 2 separate ships. The terrain was jagged stone and dust, lit only by the cold glare of a distant sun. The convoy survivors were holed up in a broken canyon, their beacons faint but still transmitting. Between them and safety, the Craw raiders had entrenched themselves in rocky ridges, heavy weapons glinting in the weak light. The Karathi moved in formation, shields raised, banners snapping from their armor. It was a spectacle, precise and disciplined, but loud. Too loud. Within minutes, the Craw opened fire. Energy bolts rained down, forcing the Karathi into cover, their banners shredded to rags. Dane and his squad moved differently. No formation, no signals, just shadows slipping from rock to rock. While the Karathi pinned the enemy with sheer bulk, the humans slid through the chaos like knives. Mason slit a Craw's throat before the alien even registered the motion. Hale placed a round through the scope of a heavy gunner, the shot so clean it dropped 2 more in the line of fire. By the time the Karathi reached the Craw position, half the defenders were already dead. The humans had cut through them silently, leaving only bodies cooling in the dust. Varun roared in anger when he realized. He stormed up to Dane in the middle of the battlefield, his massive chest heaving. "You robbed my warriors of their honor," he bellowed. "You kill from the shadows like thieves, like cowards!" Dane didn't flinch. "We kill to win. Honor doesn't matter if you're dead." Varun's claws flexed dangerously. For a moment, it seemed like he might strike Dane down where he stood. But before he could move, another explosion rocked the canyon. More Craw ships were descending, reinforcements dropping into the dust storm. The argument ended there. The next wave was heavier, stronger. The Karathi charged them head-on, their roars echoing through the canyons. The humans disappeared into the smoke, each one hunting alone. Where the Karathi clashed like titans, the humans killed like phantoms. By the time the dust cleared, the battlefield was littered with corpses. Craw, Karathi, and more than a few unlucky survivors who had strayed into the crossfire. The council convoy was saved, yes, but at a cost. Nearly a third of the Karathi company lay dead. And when the council reviewed the combat recordings, they saw once again what the humans truly were. Executioners, not soldiers. In the council chambers, voices rose in fury. Delegates from softer species demanded that humanity be withdrawn, that these death squads be sent back to their homeworld before they poisoned the war effort with their brutality. The Karathi delegation stormed out in disgust, calling the humans dishonorable, unworthy of being allies. But others were silent. Because buried beneath the outrage was a truth none of them could ignore. The humans won. Every mission they touched ended in results. Terrifying results. Yes, but victories, where others had only delivered stalemates or defeats. And in the quiet corners of the council's war rooms, whispers began to spread. Whispers that maybe these Terrans were exactly what the galaxy needed. That maybe the council hadn't unleashed monsters. They had unleashed the only thing strong enough to match the Craw. Back in the barracks, Dane stripped off his armor and sat on the edge of his bunk. His squad moved around him in silence, cleaning weapons, tending wounds, sharpening steel. None of them looked uneasy. None of them cared about the political storm outside, but Dane could feel the shift in the air. The aliens didn't want them here. They feared them. and fear had a way of twisting into betrayal when the time was right. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes cold. "This war isn't about saving them," he said quietly, voice low enough that only his squad could hear. "It's about proving we can do what they can't. And when they're done using us, when they try to throw us away—" Mason grinned, teeth sharp in the dim light. "Then we'll show them what happens when you betray a death squad." The room went silent again. Not because they disagreed, but because every man there knew it was true. The galaxy had asked for an army. They had sent killers instead. And killers don't go back into cages quietly. The council chambers were filled with noise. Not the dignified debate of diplomats, but the raised voices of frightened leaders. The last mission on the barren moon had cracked something wide open. The humans had saved the convoy. Yes, but the recordings were spreading through the fleets like infection. Soldiers whispered about the way the Terrans moved. Commanders whispered about the Karathi dead, their bodies left in heaps while the humans walked away untouched. The galaxy was afraid. The insectoid marshal stood rigid at the center of the storm, mandibles clicking in agitation. "This cannot continue," it snapped, voice amplified across the chamber. "The Terrans do not fight wars. They butcher. Already the Karathi delegation threatens to withdraw their forces if humans remain deployed. Do you understand what that means? An entire front collapsing. The Kra will roll over us like fire through dry grass." A reptilian delegate slammed a claw against the table. "And what do you suggest? Send them home? The Kra were winning before they arrived. Every world they touched fell. Every battle we lost. And now, since the humans joined, we have victories. Yes, they are ugly victories. Yes, they are horrifying. But the Kra bleed, and the Kra only respect power. You would throw away the only thing that terrifies them?" A murmur ran through the chamber. One of the avian representatives leaned forward, feathers twitching nervously. "Terrify them, yes. But what happens when the humans turn on us?" "Have you seen the footage? They do not follow orders. They do not respect authority. They answer only to themselves. We called for allies, not predators." The reptilian snarled. "Predators are what we need." The chamber dissolved into argument again, voices overlapping, claws and feathers and mandibles slamming. It was chaos. It was fear dressed as politics. In the shadows of the chamber, behind the rows of delegates, the intelligence operatives listened in silence. They didn't speak. They didn't argue. They simply watched and recorded and calculated. Because already the decision had been made, not in the chamber, but in quiet back rooms where true power was wielded. The humans were useful, but they were too dangerous to keep forever. They would need to be contained. And if containment failed, eliminated. Dane didn't care about council chambers. He didn't care about speeches or politics or whispers. He cared about missions. He cared about men. The rest was noise. But even in the barracks, even among killers who didn't give a damn about alien posturing, the whispers found their way in. Mason spat into a rag as he polished his rifle. "They're talking about pulling us out," he muttered, voice sharp with contempt. "Calling us unstable, dangerous. Like they weren't the ones who begged for us in the first place." Hale chuckled darkly, his eyes never leaving the knife he was running across a whetstone. "They're scared. That's all it is. Scared little things who asked for wolves and then cried when the wolves showed teeth." Dane leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. He said nothing for a long while. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, cold. "Scared allies are worse than enemies. At least enemies don't pretend." The men fell silent at that. They all knew what it meant. If the council decided they were a liability, if they tried to cut them loose, the death squads would not go quietly. The next mission arrived faster than expected. It reeked of politics. The council briefed it with unusual ceremony, as though dressing the orders in silk might hide the knife beneath. A massive Krah fortress had been identified deep in contested space. Intelligence suggested it was a command hub, coordinating raids across half the front. If it fell, the council would gain a decisive advantage. The humans were to lead the assault, but not alone. The Korathi were assigned as primary support, their commander Vorun reinstated, despite the heavy losses under his watch. Several other species contributed detachments as well. The council painted it as unity, as proof that the galaxy still fought as one. Dane saw it for what it was: a leash. Too many eyes, too many witnesses, too many ways for this mission to become something other than victory. He didn't like it. His men didn't like it. But orders were orders. And Dane had learned long ago that orders didn't matter half as much as how you twisted them when the bullets started flying. The approach to the Krah fortress was a nightmare. Jagged asteroids ringed the planet like teeth, forcing the fleet to weave through narrow corridors of rock and debris. Krah patrols prowled constantly, their sleek black ships darting through the shadows. By the time the assault force touched down on the planet's scorched surface, half the drop shuttles were smoking wrecks. Alien soldiers stumbled from their ships dazed and bloodied, more than a few already dead. The fortress itself loomed in the distance, a black monolith rising from the cracked earth, spires reaching into a sky choked with storm clouds. Energy shields shimmered faintly around its walls, daring anyone to come closer. Vorun gathered his Korathi at the front, banners raised high, voices lifted in ritual chants. To them, it was not a battle, it was theater, honor, legacy. Dane and his squad checked their weapons in silence. No banners, no chants, just steel and resolve. Vorun turned to him, sneer etched across his scaled face. "Stay out of our way, Terran. We will show the galaxy how real warriors fight." Dane didn't answer. He didn't need to. He knew how this would end. The battle began in thunder. The Korathi charged first, their massive frames crashing against the fortress shields, blades flashing, war cries splitting the sky. Energy bolts rained down from the battlements, cutting into their lines, but still they pushed forward, hacking at the barriers like ancient berserkers. The other species followed in staggered formations, trying to support the Korathi's brute force with precision fire. The field became chaos. Aliens screaming, weapons roaring, bodies falling, and the humans vanished. While the others drew the fortress's wrath, Dane and his squad slipped into the smoke and dust. They found cracks in the shield where no one else had thought to look, weak points masked by the fortress's arrogance. They cut through them with explosives, slid inside the walls, and began the work they were made for. Inside, the fortress was a maze of steel and shadows. Krah soldiers patrolled in disciplined squads, weapons ready, voices harsh and guttural. None of it mattered. Mason's blade whispered across throats. Hale's rifle barked once, twice, each shot clean and final. The others moved like wraiths, clearing halls before alarms could even rise. Dane led from the front, cold eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. He moved like a man who had lived his entire life in war. And in truth, he had. By the time the Krah realized intruders were inside, half their command staff lay dead. But victory never comes without a price. The deeper the humans pushed, the heavier the resistance grew. Automated turrets hummed to life, shredding walls into molten slag. Krah warriors in heavy armor forced brutal close-quarters fights. Dane's men bled. Mason took a round through the shoulder. Hale's knife hand shook from burns where plasma had kissed his flesh. Still they pushed forward. Still they killed. And then they reached it, the command chamber. The Krah commander stood waiting, a massive brute clad in black armor, eyes burning like coals. Its voice boomed across the chamber. "Terrans, I knew it would be you." It didn't posture. It didn't threaten. It simply drew its blade and charged. The fight was chaos. Dane met the commander head-on, steel against alien alloy, every strike rattling bone. The others circled, firing, stabbing, cutting. But the Krah was a monster, shrugging off wounds that would have killed 10 lesser soldiers. It took everything, every shot, every blade, every ounce of fury, to bring it down. Dane drove his knife through the commander's throat as Hale emptied a rifle into its chest, Mason jamming explosives into its armor. The beast collapsed finally, shaking the chamber with its death throes. The fortress command was theirs. The battle outside began to shift. With their leader dead and their systems in chaos, the Krah broke, scattering into retreat. The council forces roared in triumph. The Karathi raised their banners, declaring victory. The galaxy would remember this day. But inside the chamber, Dane stood silent, blood dripping from his blade, eyes cold, because even as the fortress burned, he knew the truth. This wasn't a mission. It was a test. The council had thrown them into hell, surrounded them with witnesses, waiting to see if the death squads would break. And they hadn't. They had won, which meant the council would fear them even more. That night, as the fleets regrouped, Dane sat alone in the dark hold of his transport. His men slept fitfully around him, wounds bandaged, weapons cleaned. He stared at the floor, jaw clenched. He could feel it now, clearer than ever, the weight of eyes watching from the shadows. The council didn't want them as allies. The council wanted them as weapons, sharp and brutal, but disposable. And one day soon, the order would come. Not to fight the Krah, to put down the humans. Dane's lips curled into something that might have been a smile, if there had been any warmth in it. Let them try. The fortress was ash when the humans left it behind. 1,000 alien soldiers cheered the victory, banners waving, horns blaring, fleets signaling across the void. The official reports called it a turning point in the war. The Krah had been dealt a blow so severe they would be forced to regroup. The council broadcast it as proof of unity. But Dane knew better. Unity had nothing to do with it. Victory didn't belong to the council. It belonged to his men, and they were the only ones who knew what it had cost. Inside the transport, the squad was quiet. Mason's arm was strapped tight from the plasma wound. Hale leaned against the wall, his burned hand still trembling. The others cleaned their weapons with silent ritual, each motion slow and careful. More therapy than maintenance. Dane sat apart, staring into the dark corner of the hold. His thoughts weren't on the battle. They were on the eyes of the council delegates watching the footage, reviewing the data, counting bodies. Not Krah bodies, human ones. He could feel the weight of those eyes even now. The council convened in secret. No grand chamber this time, no rows of squabbling delegates, just a handful of the most powerful, those who actually made decisions while others screamed. The insectoid marshal clicked its mandibles in measured rhythm, pacing across the polished floor. They are unstable. You saw the reports. They follow no chain of command, no structure, no code. They kill everything in their path. If we allow them to continue unchecked, they will fracture the entire alliance. The reptilian leaned back in its chair, claws tapping lazily. Unstable, yes, but effective. Do you deny the results? Every engagement they touch turns to victory. At what cost? The avian shrieked, feathers ruffling. The Karathi despise them. The Shiren have already withdrawn their detachments rather than serve beside them. Every day, resentment grows. Every day, fear spreads. Sooner or later, Someone will decide the Terrans are the greater threat than the Craw. The insectoid stopped pacing. Its multifaceted eyes glimmered in the low light. Then we remove the threat before it grows too large. Silence followed. No one protested. Because the truth was clear, the humans had shown too much. They would not be allies. They would not be controlled. They would be erased. The orders came within a week. Dane's squad was summoned to a briefing aboard a council carrier. The mission was presented with all the usual ceremony, as though anyone in the room believed in honor anymore. A Craw weapons depot had been located on a remote, volcanic world. The depot supposedly housed stockpiles of plasma artillery that had been crippling the Council's fleets for months. The humans were to infiltrate, sabotage, and destroy the depot before it could be relocated. Dane listened without expression, but the details itched at him. Too neat, too simple, intelligence too perfect, the kind of perfect that stank of bait. When the briefing ended, the marshal's eyes lingered on him just a moment too long. Dane held the stare, unblinking, until the insectoid looked away. That night, as the squad prepared, Dane gathered them in the hold. His voice was low, calm, but every man there felt the tension in it. "This isn't about the depot," Dane said. "It's about us." Mason frowned. "You think it's a setup?" "I know it is." Hale grinned without humor. "Finally. I was starting to wonder when they'd grow the balls to try." The others shifted, checking weapons with renewed purpose. None of them were surprised. They had all known, in their own way, that this day would come. Dane leaned forward, eyes sharp. "We're not dying on their leash. If they want to kill us, we make them pay for the attempt." The volcanic world was a hellscape. Rivers of molten rock cut through black stone ridges, choking the air with sulfur and ash. The heat shimmered even through their visors, every breath like swallowing fire. The depot loomed in the distance, a sprawling complex of black towers and glowing shields built into the side of a jagged cliff. It looked wrong immediately. Too quiet, too clean, no patrols, no defenses. Dane signaled for silence. The squad advanced through the rocks, spreading wide, weapons ready. Mason climbed to higher ground, scanning through a scope. Hale moved low, knife in hand, eyes darting to every shadow. And then Dane saw it. Not Craw soldiers, not plasma artillery, council troops. Dozens of them, hidden poorly among the rocks, weapons trained on the approach, not guarding the depot, guarding the kill zone. The trap snapped shut. Gunfire erupted from the cliffs, a storm of plasma and steel. The squad dove for cover as the world lit up around them, rocks shattering, molten spray exploding into the air. Mason cursed into the comms. "Told you it was too easy," Hale laughed, feral, as he slit the throat of the first council soldier stupid enough to get close. "Finally, some honesty from our friends." Dane moved like a ghost through the chaos, barking orders sharp and fast. "Break their line. Take the high ground. Don't give them room to breathe." The squad obeyed without hesitation. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were predators, unleashed. Council troops fell by the dozen, their formations shredded by shadows they couldn't track. The humans didn't fight fair. They never had. Smoke, blood, and screams filled the air until the kill zone looked less like a battlefield and more like a slaughterhouse. When the last shot faded, silence pressed heavy against the volcanic wind. Bodies littered the rocks. Council insignias burned among the dead. Dane stood over them, breathing slow, calm. He wiped blood from his blade with mechanical precision. "They thought we wouldn't see it," he said quietly. "They thought they could erase us like we were just another problem." Mason spat into the ash. "Their mistake." Hale crouched beside a corpse, prying a plasma pack free. His grin was sharp and ugly. "They've declared war on us now, not the Kra, us!" The others nodded in grim silence, because they all understood what this meant. The galaxy wasn't afraid of losing the war. The galaxy was afraid of them, and that meant the real war had just begun. Hours later, Dane accessed the depot's systems. There were no plasma stockpiles, no weapons, nothing but empty corridors and falsified data. The Council hadn't even bothered to make the lie convincing. They hadn't cared if the humans noticed. They had only cared that the humans died. Dane stared at the empty screens, jaw tight. For a moment, his hand trembled. Not from fear, from rage. "They've shown their hand," he said finally, turning to his men. His voice was steel. "The Council wants us gone. They don't care about victory. They don't care about the Kra. They care about control. And they'll keep sending us into traps until we're ash like this depot." Mason stepped forward, eyes cold. "So what now? We keep playing their game?" Dane shook his head slowly. "No. We stop playing." The squad stared at him, the weight of the words sinking in. For years they had been weapons. For months they had been the galaxy's monsters. But now they were free. Free to choose their own war. Dane's gaze swept over them, one by one. Hardened killers, scarred and broken but bound together by something stronger than orders. "They want to fear us?" Dane said. His voice was calm, steady, lethal. "Then let's give them a reason." Back in the Council's secure chambers, news of the failed operation spread like wildfire. Reports arrived of heavy casualties among the escort troops, of human survivors unaccounted for. The Marshal slammed a clawed hand against the table. "Unacceptable! They should have been contained, eliminated!" The reptilian hissed low. "Instead, you've unleashed them. If they survived, and they will survive, you've given them proof of betrayal. They will not forgive it." The avian's feathers puffed in panic. "Then we must unite against them, all species, at once, before they strike first." The chamber fell into silence. Because the truth was already clear. The humans would strike. And when they did, no one knew if even the combined strength of the galaxy could stop them. On the volcanic world, Dane and his squad stood amid the burning wreckage of the false depot. The flames painted their faces in red and gold, their eyes cold, their weapons dark against the glow. For the first time since arriving in this war, Dane felt clarity. They weren't here to save the galaxy. They weren't here to fight the Kra. They were here to survive. And anyone who stood in their way, Council, Kra, or anyone else, would learn what it meant to fear humanity. The galaxy had asked for an army. It had sent death squads. And now those squads were at war with everyone. The volcanic world fell silent behind them as the humans vanished into the void. No reports were filed, no Council channels answered, no survivors confirmed. Dane had chosen their path the moment the trap was sprung. No more leash, no more chain of command, no more pretending they were part of someone else's war. Now they were ghosts. The stolen dropship shuddered as it broke through void space, hull scorched, engines coughing from the abuse. Inside, the squad sat in the red glow of emergency lights. Mason stitched his own shoulder with crude precision, the needle biting flesh without so much as a flinch. Hale dismantled and rebuilt his rifle on repeat, every motion sharp, mechanical, obsessive. The others sat silent. Faces blank, weapons close. Dane stood at the cockpit, watching the stars smear into black streaks, his jaw clenched tight. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about the Kra. He wasn't thinking about Council missions. He was thinking about revenge. News spread fast across the Council fleets. Official broadcasts lit every screen, every channel, carrying the same message. The Terran death squads have gone rogue. They betrayed their mission, attacked Council forces, and now operate as enemies of the Alliance. They are to be considered hostile, dangerous, terminate on sight. The footage that followed was spliced together from mission recordings, grainy images of humans stabbing, shooting, burning. The narration painted them as war criminals, monsters who had slaughtered allies as easily as enemies. The galaxy ate it up. Alien soldiers cursed their names in barracks. Delegates swore vengeance in council halls. Civilians whispered stories of the Terrans who drank blood, who killed for sport, who would one day come for their children. But not everyone believed. In backwater colonies, among smugglers and mercenaries, in the gutter worlds where council law never reached, the stories twisted into something else. The humans weren't monsters, they were legends, men who answered betrayal with fire, men who refused chains, men who carved survival from the throat of the galaxy itself. And legends had a way of attracting followers. The first raid was small. A council freighter loaded with medical supplies, escorted by a handful of patrol ships. The humans hid it in the dark between systems, striking fast, brutal, and precise. They boarded the freighter, cut down the guards, stripped it clean. Not a single alien crewman survived. The squad left the ship adrift, a burned husk spinning through void space. When the council found it, every wall was marked with the same words scrawled in blood: "We are not your soldiers." The second raid was larger. A convoy of fuel tankers, heavily armed escorts bristling with guns. The council expected pirates. They weren't prepared for humans. Dane's squad tore through the escort ships like wolves through sheep, their stolen dropship darting and weaving with impossible precision. They boarded the tankers, planted charges, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. When the council ships found the wreckage, the fuel burned in great rivers of fire, lighting the system like a second sun. The humans didn't leave a message this time. The fire spoke well enough. By the third raid, the council was desperate. They doubled patrols, tripled escorts, rerouted supplies through safer channels. It didn't matter. The humans adapted faster than any fleet could. They struck where the defenses were weakest, where the council thought no one would dare. They vanished before pursuit could close in. And every time they hit, they left nothing but corpses and ash. The broadcasts grew more frantic. The Terrans are terrorists, murderers, a threat to all species. But in the shadow markets of fringe systems, merchants sold trinkets painted in human colors. Smugglers whispered about seeing Dane's squad with their own eyes. Young mercenaries spoke of joining them one day, fighting not for council lies, but for their own survival. Fear was spreading, but so was respect. One night, in the black between systems, they found allies of a kind. The dropship was running dark, drifting silent through void space when a signal crackled across their comms. A voice, low and guttural, speaking in broken trade tongue. "You are Terrans. We know. We watched. We approve." Dane's eyes narrowed. He traced the signal to a small frigate trailing just outside weapons range. Its markings were old, faded. Scavenger paint across stolen metal. Not Council, not Craw, something in between. "State your business," Dane replied, voice cold. The guttural voice rasped back. "Business is survival. You kill Council. We want Council dead. Same goal." Mason leaned forward, scowling. "Probably a trap." Hale smirked. "So what? We're good at traps." Dane considered the signal for a long moment. Then he answered. "Doc, but try anything stupid and we'll paint your hull with your own blood." The scavenger crew that boarded looked like nightmares, mixed-species outcasts in mismatched armor, weapons scavenged from a dozen wars. Their leader was a scarred reptilian with one eye, voice rough as stone. "We've seen your work," it rasped. "Council calls you monsters. We call you useful." Dane didn't respond. He let the silence weigh heavy until the scavenger shifted uneasily. Finally, Dane spoke. "What do you want?" The reptilian's good eye gleamed. "Trade. You need fuel, weapons, safe ports. We need killers. You raid for us. We supply you. Together we survive." Mason's lip curled. "Sounds like slavery." The reptilian bared jagged teeth. "No. Sounds like business. Council already hunts you. Krah already fear you. Better to have allies than none." The squad watched Dane. They trusted him to decide. Dane's eyes were cold as void. "We're not your mercenaries. We don't fight for anyone's banner. We fight for ourselves. You want us to bleed for you?" "Wrong squad." The reptilian hesitated. Then it laughed, low and rough. "Good. That's the answer I hoped for. No masters, no chains, only survival." Supplies changed hands, no contracts signed, no deals bound. But the seed was planted. The humans weren't alone anymore. The Krah noticed, too. In council transmissions, fragments of intercepted Krah chatter began to appear. They spoke of the Terrans not with hatred, but with caution, respect. The humans burn everything they touch. They are not soldiers, they are plague. Better to turn a plague upon the council than waste time destroying it. The implication was clear. The Krah wanted to use them. Dane sat in the cockpit, watching the stars slip past. Mason snored low against the bulkhead, his arm still stiff. Hale sat cross-legged with his knife, carving patterns into the steel floor. The others slept in uneasy silence. Dane didn't sleep. Not anymore. His mind was sharp, restless, hungry. He thought about the council, about their trap. About the whispers of fear spreading across fleets and colonies. He thought about the scavenger allies, the Krah chatter, the galaxy watching with wide, terrified eyes. And he realized something. They had already lost the war for control. They weren't soldiers anymore. They weren't part of anyone's command. But fear? Fear was theirs. And fear was power. Dane leaned back, eyes narrowing. "We don't need armies," he murmured, voice low, barely audible even to himself. "We are the army." The words felt right, heavy, final. The galaxy had asked for soldiers. Instead, it had unleashed executioners. And executioners don't stop until the world is silent. Across the council's fleets, panic spread. Convoys rerouted, patrols doubled, propaganda screamed louder. But no matter what they tried, the humans struck again, and again, and again. Always in the shadows, always without mercy. The council had wanted to erase them. Now they were everywhere. Now they were the war. The raids became stories. Not council reports, not broadcasts, but whispers carried from ship to ship, from port to port. Whispers of a squad of Terrans who struck without warning, who killed without hesitation, who burned everything the council tried to protect. Whispers of men who had no masters, no chains, no laws. The council tried to spin the narrative. They plastered Dane's face across 100 worlds, painting him as a butcher, a traitor, a monster. They showed images of Mason carving through Karathi lines, Hale's knives dripping, the squad leaving battlefields painted in blood. But propaganda is a dangerous weapon. Sometimes it cuts the hand that wields it. For every alien who spat at their names, another whispered them with awe. For every colony that cursed the Terrans, another cheered the fact that someone, anyone, had the courage to stand against the council. And the squad? They didn't just survive the story, they became it. Dane sat in the dark hold of their stolen ship, watching the broadcast flicker across a cracked screen. His own image stared back at him, a hollow-eyed predator, knife in hand, surrounded by flames. The council's voice droned. This man leads the rogue Terran death squads. He is wanted for treason, war crimes, and the slaughter of innocents. Report sightings immediately. Terminate on sight." The screen cut to black. Mason spat on the deck. "Treason! Funny word for men who never swore loyalty in the first place." Hale chuckled, low and sharp. "Slaughter of innocents. If they only knew what their own hands look like under the light." The others stayed silent, but Dane felt their eyes on him. They were waiting. They always waited. He turned from the screen, his voice calm, steady. "They've done our work for us. Every time they call us monsters, the galaxy listens. And monsters are remembered." The first deserters came quietly. A pair of alien mercenaries, scarred and hollow-eyed, tracked them down in a debris field. They offered supplies in exchange for shelter, whispering that the Council had abandoned them, branded them cowards for surviving battles they couldn't win. Dane looked them over coldly. "We're not a refuge. You want safety? Find it somewhere else." But the mercenaries shook their heads. "Not safety. Purpose. You fight the way no one else dares. We want to fight that way too." The squad argued later, voices low and sharp. Mason said they couldn't trust outsiders. Hale said they could use bodies to throw into the fire. Dane ended it with a single sentence. "We're not building an army. We're building fear, and fear spreads faster if more voices carry it." The mercenaries stayed, and others followed. Outcasts, deserters, smugglers. Not disciplined soldiers, never that, but killers, survivors, those who had nothing left to lose. The squad didn't lead them. The squad showed them. And the galaxy began to realize that the death squads were no longer just a handful of Terrans. They were something larger, something darker. The Council finally moved to end it. They assembled a fleet. Not patrols, not convoys, but a hunter's armada. Dozens of ships, bait convoys placed like crumbs across void space, the Terrans funneled toward a single trap. The Council called it Operation Silence. They didn't whisper about it in chambers. They shouted it across their networks, swearing to every frightened civilian that the Terran plague would be ended. It was their biggest mistake yet. The squad hit the convoy as expected. A freighter loaded with food and fuel, poorly guarded, seemingly vulnerable. Dane knew it was bait. He smelled it in the way the escorts moved, too precise, too clean. But he hit it anyway, not because he wanted the supplies, because he wanted the Council to think he was playing their game. The trap snapped shut. Ships erupted from void space in all directions, a wall of steel and fire. Battleships, cruisers, frigates, all pouring plasma into the black. The squad's stolen dropship dove hard, weaving through fire like a shadow. Mason cursed into the comms. "Whole damn fleet out here!" Hale's laughter was sharp and manic. "Finally, they're scared enough to send everything." The others braced for death. But Dane was calm. "Let them close in," he said. The Council thought they had cornered prey. What they didn't know was that Dane had planned for this. The deserters, the outcasts, the mercenaries. They hadn't just followed. They had been positioned, scattered through the debris fields, hidden in the black. Dozens of small ships, ragged and mismatched, waiting for Dane's signal. And when he gave it, hell erupted. The Council fleet suddenly found itself attacked from every angle, not just by the Terrans, but by the shadows they had gathered. Smuggler frigates rammed into cruisers, mercenary ships unleashed stolen torpedoes, scavenger gunboats tore through the flanks. The sky burned. The death squads moved through the chaos like phantoms, striking and vanishing, leaving wreckage in their wake. Council formations broke. Panic spread. What was meant to be a hunt turned into a slaughter. By the time the Council realized they weren't fighting just Terrans anymore, it was too late. Their fleet was ash, and in the wreckage, the Terrans painted their message again. Not in blood this time, but in fire across the void. We are the shadows you created. The galaxy trembled. The Council tried to spin the disaster, but the truth spread faster. Operation Silence hadn't silenced anything. It had made the Terrans louder than ever. Now they weren't just a rogue squad. They were a movement. Colonies whispered of joining them. Mercenaries offered their blades. Even some Council soldiers began deserting, leaving messages behind. Better to fight with wolves than die with sheep. The Krah watched, amused. Their war temporarily slowed as they studied the chaos. Reports suggested their leaders debated whether to crush the Terrans or to speak with them. And through it all, Dane sat in the stolen cockpit, watching stars slip by, his mind colder than the void. Mason finally asked the question they had all been circling. What's the end game here, Dane? We can't run forever. We can't fight everyone, not forever. Dane turned his eyes from the stars, his voice flat and sharp. We don't run. We don't hide. We don't fight for them. We don't fight for the Krah. We fight for us. And when they look at the dark, I want them to remember what waits there. Us, humanity. Death in uniform. Hale grinned. Blood still crusted on his burned hand. So we don't end the war. We become it. Dane didn't smile, but he didn't need to, because that was the truth. On a fractured outpost at the edge of the galaxy, a group of smugglers gathered around a flickering holoscreen. It showed grainy footage of human silhouettes moving through smoke, Council soldiers screaming in the dark. The audio carried a single voice, cold and steady. Dane's voice. You asked for an army. We gave you death squads, and now you'll see what happens when death stops following orders. The smugglers sat in silence. Then one of them whispered what many across the galaxy were already saying. They're not soldiers anymore, they're executioners, and executioners don't stop until the galaxy is silent. For the first time in history, the Council feared more than the Krah. They feared the Terrans. And for the first time in history, fear itself belonged to humanity. The wreckage of Operation Silence still drifted through void space when the message came. It wasn't Council channels. It wasn't smugglers or scavengers. It wasn't even one of the frightened colonies whispering for help. It was the Krah. The transmission cut through every jammer the squad had set. Clean and deliberate. The voice that came through was deep, guttural, carrying a weight that silenced the room. Terrans, you are no longer prey. You are potential. The men stiffened. Mason's jaw tightened. Hale's grin sharpened. Dane just leaned forward, eyes narrowed at the flickering hollow. The voice continued. You fight as we fight, without mercy, without hesitation. You are not bound by chains. You are what the Council fears most, and what we respect most. There was no threat, no insult, just acknowledgement. And then the words that changed everything. We would meet. The squad argued for hours. Mason swore it was a trap, the same kind the Council had laid. Hale laughed it off, saying if the Krah wanted them dead, they'd already be corpses. The others hovered between unease and hunger. The hunger for something bigger than just running, bigger than raids and whispers. Dane listened. He let them speak, let them vent, let them spill the truth. Then he stood, his voice calm, final. They want to meet because they respect us, not because they love us, not because they trust us, because we've shown them fear. That's the only language that matters in this galaxy. And if we don't hear them out, someone else will. Someone weaker. Someone who will sell us out. We meet them, on our terms, and if it's a trap. He glanced around the room, eyes cold. Then we show them why traps don't work on death squads. The meeting place was a dead world. A barren rock spinning in the dark, stripped of atmosphere long ago. No life No colonies, no fleets, just silence. The squad descended in their scarred dropship, weapons ready, every man wired for betrayal. The Krah were already there, a single ship, black as the void, waiting on the surface. Its ramp extended, a line of armored warriors standing in perfect stillness. At their head, a massive figure, taller than any Dane had ever faced. Eyes burning like coals, the Krah commander. Dane stepped forward first, his men flanking him like shadows. The silence between the two sides was heavier than the planet's dead gravity. Finally, the commander spoke. Its voice was like grinding stone. "You are smaller than I expected." Dane's voice was flat. "And you're slower than I expected." The Krah warriors tensed, claws twitching toward weapons, but the commander raised a hand, silencing them. And then, to Dane's surprise, it laughed. "Good. You are not afraid." The negotiations were nothing like council diplomacy. No speeches, no ceremonies, no false kindness, just blunt words. The Krah commander laid it out simply. The war was changing. The council was fracturing. The humans had already done more damage to unity than the Krah ever could. "You are proof," the commander growled. "Proof that the council's codes make them weak. That fear, not honor, is the true weapon. Join us, and the galaxy will learn the truth." The squad exchanged uneasy glances. Hale's grin widened. Mason's hand clenched on his rifle. Dane stayed silent, eyes locked on the commander. Finally he spoke. "You don't want us as allies. You want us as tools, same as the council. You want us to bleed for you while you sit on your throne." The commander's burning eyes narrowed. "And you? What do you want?" Dane stepped forward, close enough to feel the heat of the alien's breath. His voice was low, cold, final. "I want the galaxy to remember humanity the way it remembers fire. Not as soldiers, not as slaves, as executioners." The Krah commander studied him for a long moment. Then it nodded once, slow and heavy. "Perhaps," it said, "perhaps you are more dangerous than even we imagined." They left without an agreement. No treaties, no oaths, no promises. But there was no battle either. And that, Dane realized, was the agreement. The Krah would not hunt them. Not yet. Not while they burned the council from within. It was respect. Dangerous respect. The council, meanwhile, descended into panic. The failure of Operation Silence had shaken them, but whispers of the Krah meeting with Terrans cracked something deeper. If their greatest enemy and their most dangerous rogue element found common ground, even respect, the balance of power would collapse completely. So they stopped whispering. They stopped scheming. They declared war, not just on the Krah, not just on rogue colonies, but on the humans themselves. The broadcasts went out across every system. "The Terran death squads are no longer fugitives. They are enemies of every world under council law. Any who harbor them will be destroyed. Any who speak for them will be punished. This is not a request. This is survival." And fleets moved. Not one fleet, all of them. Species that had been fractured, arguing, divided, suddenly united by one fear greater than the Krah. The humans. Dane sat in the cockpit, listening to the broadcast. His men watched him, waiting for anger, for rage, for some spark of emotion. But when he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "They've finally told the truth. We're not part of their war anymore. We're the war itself." Mason shook his head. "They'll throw everything at us. Fleets, armies, bounty hunters. We can't fight all of them." Hale leaned back, grinning like a wolf. "So what? The more they throw, the more they bleed. They think they can scare us with numbers. But fear doesn't come from numbers. It comes from us." The others stayed silent, weighing the truth of it. Dane looked out at the stars. his reflection cold in the viewport. They want to hunt us? Let them. We'll burn their ships, bleed their fleets, choke their colonies. Every time they come for us, we make them regret it. Every time they whisper our names, we make the whisper darker. They want to make us the enemy of the galaxy? Fine. We'll be the enemy they can never kill, the shadow they can never escape. Across the stars, the galaxy prepared for the final hunt. Council fleets mobilized, Krah warlords sharpened their blades, colonies armed themselves, uncertain which predator would strike first. And in the shadows between systems, Dane and his death squads sharpened their knives, their weapons, their rage. The galaxy had asked for an army. It had received death squads. And now those death squads stood at the edge of legend, ready to carve their mark into history with blood and fire. Dane knew what came next. The end, one way or another. The stars were full of enemies. From the moment the Council's declaration spread across the galaxy, Dane knew what was coming. Fleets would rise, colonies would burn, entire species would set aside centuries of hatred just to destroy the Terrans. And he was right. The first sighting came in the form of scanners screaming warnings across their stolen ships' consoles. An armada, not patrols, not convoys, a united fleet, dozens of species side by side, their banners flashing across the void. They weren't here for the Krah. They were here for him. In the hold, Mason slammed a fresh clip into his rifle, his face pale but steady. That's it then. Whole damn galaxy wants us gone. Hale grinned, his knife flashing as he twirled it in the dim light. Good. Makes it easier. No more guessing who's a friend. The others moved in silence, checking weapons, strapping armor, tightening straps. They weren't nervous. They weren't afraid. They'd lived too long with death for fear to matter anymore. Dane stood apart, his eyes locked on the holomap as the fleet formations shifted. He wasn't looking for weakness. He wasn't planning survival. He was looking at history being written, and he knew whose name would be carved into it. The Council fleet advanced in waves, the void lit with streaks of plasma and the roar of engines. Dane's squad moved like phantoms, weaving through fire, striking from the shadows. Their ship tore through escorts, boarded frigates, left wreckage spinning like corpses in the dark. But for every ship they destroyed, 3 more closed in. The fleet was too large, too coordinated. For the first time, Dane felt the inevitability pressing down on him. And then the Krah arrived. Their ships dropped out of void space like knives from the dark, black hulls bristling with weapons. They didn't attack the humans. They didn't attack the Council. They attacked both. The battlefield dissolved into chaos. Council cruisers clashed with Krah warships, screams flooding comms as allies turned to enemies in seconds. Explosions ripped across the void, the fire swallowing ships whole. And in the middle of it all, Dane and his squad carved their path. They boarded a Council dreadnought, cutting through its corridors like wolves in a slaughterhouse. Mason fired until his rifle clicked empty, then swung it like a club. Hale moved with his knife, a blur of blood and motion. Laughter echoing off steel walls. The others followed, every step leaving bodies behind. Dane led them with cold precision, his blade dripping as he moved from kill to kill. He didn't fight like a soldier. He fought like inevitability, each strike final, each motion perfect in its brutality. By the time they reached the command deck, the dreadnought was already dying. Fires roared through the hull, alarms screamed, bodies littered the floor. Dane stood at the center, breathing steady, his visor cracked, blood streaking his armor. The alien officers stared at him in terror, their weapons trembling in their hands. He raised his voice, calm, steady, carrying across the dying ship. You asked for an army. We gave you death squads. You called us monsters. You were right." He stepped forward, his eyes burning cold. "And monsters don't die quietly." The dreadnought went up in fire, its death lighting the battlefield. The squad barely escaped in a stolen shuttle, tumbling through the chaos of fleets tearing each other apart. The council was breaking. The Krah were bleeding. The void was littered with wreckage and corpses. And still, the humans fought. But the cost was rising. One by one, the squad was cut down. Mason fell first, plasma tearing through his chest as he shielded Hale from fire. He died without a word, his rifle still clutched tight. Hale went next, surrounded in a corridor, knives flashing until his body gave out under the weight of too many blades. His laughter echoed even as he fell. The others followed, each one carving blood into the galaxy before they dropped, until only Dane remained. His shuttle crashed on a barren moon, smoke and fire tearing across the surface. He dragged himself from the wreckage, armor broken, blade dull, blood dripping from every wound. Above him, the sky burned. Council and Krah fleets shredded each other, explosions lighting the void like a second sun. Dane stood on the rocks, broken but unbowed, and activated the shuttle's last transmitter. His voice carried across every frequency, bleeding into comms on both sides. "This is Sergeant Dane of Earth." The battlefield stilled. The fleets listened. "You called us monsters. You tried to erase us. You sent fleets, armies, assassins, and still, we burned you." He coughed, blood spilling from his lips, but his voice never shook. "You wanted us to be soldiers. You wanted us to die for your wars. But we weren't soldiers. We weren't slaves. We were death. And death doesn't bow to anyone." He raised his blade, cracked and bloodied toward the burning sky. "Remember this. Humanity doesn't beg. Humanity doesn't kneel. Humanity doesn't die in silence. You wanted executioners. You got them. And we don't stop until the galaxy is silent." The signal cut in static. Moments later, the fleets clashed again, fire swallowing the moon, erasing Dane in the blaze. But the message spread. It bled through council broadcasts, carried in fragments through smuggler channels, whispered on colonies at the edge of space. Humanity had not survived. It had become legend. And the legend was simple. The galaxy had asked for an army. Humanity sent death squads. And death squads never die.